Good evening. Welcome to the shiur for Shabbos, leading to Shabbos Parshas Acharei. And we'll go straight into our first question. Someone asked me, they're kind of gearing up for Lag Boimer, and which is related to Rov Akiva. And in the praises of Rov Akiva, there is this expression of Hoya Doirish al Tile Tilin al Kol Koitz or Koitz Tile Tilin Shel Halochos. On every spike of the letters of the Aleph base, he would expound piles and piles, mounds and mounds of Halochos. So perhaps the literal wording seems to imply, just like we know that from an extra word in Torah, an extra letter in Torah, so we extrapolate Halochos. So Rov Akiva would also extrapolate Halochos from the koitzin, from the spikes, from the tagging of the letters of Torah. And so this teacher asked the question: do we know of a single example of a halacha which has been developed from a koitz, from a tag, from a spike of any of the letters of the Torah? So I looked up the Gemara. The Gemara is in Menachos Daf Chof Tes Amud Beis. That Gemara talks about. The Gemara is talking about the Hebrew letters as how they should be written in the Sefer Torah. And so the sugya of the Gemara, the discussion of the Gemara, is the shape of the letters. So in that context, when Rov Akiva is told that he was doirish al kol koitz v'koitz, it doesn't mean he would extrapolate a halacha from the tagging, from the spikes of the letters, but rather he had many halachas about how to write them. So he's also lidrash al koitz kol koitz v'koitz. He's got many mounds of halachas about how you write an aleph. There are the spikes of an aleph. There's a spike at the foot. There's a spike at the top. There's a spike on the yuds of the aleph, etc. And so even on those details of the aleph base, with the tagging, which are perhaps, I'm not into safras. I'm very careful not to say anything halacha about them. There's people who specialize in that. There may be some of these things are not imperatives. Halacha, the letters might be kosher in any case, and yet there's many halachas about them. And so that's the literal meaning of Rov Akiva teaching halachas about the spikes rather than drawing halachas from the spikes. There are other interpretations of this more in Al Derech HaKabbalah, but I'm just limited to the Pashto Pshat over here of the Gemara. Second question, which I wanted to deal with us coming from Pesach, is during Pesach I came across a nice kuntras from Rabbi Bixenspanner, who is a Rov in Adas in Hendon, and actually I find it's quite inspiring because over the years he has been making a practice that every Pesach, or leading up to Pesach, he would give a drasha not only about Halochos Pesach but also about the Korban Pesach. And this year he took some 20 drashas over the years and put them together in a kuntras, in a booklet which was distributed in shuls, and someone brought it to my attention. So one of the things which he deals with is why in the at Koreich, when we have the after Matzo Moror, then we take the matzah and the moror together, and we say Kain Oso Hillel Kebizman Shabbos Mevorchim Hayakayom Koreich Pesach Matzo Moror v'Oichlem b'Yachad Shenemar Al Matzos Al Meroirim Yechelu. Now, what I've shown you here on the screen is we have two psukim. One is in Parshas Boi, and the later one is Parshas somewhere around there, Sefer Bamidbar at any rate. The first one is about Pesach Rishon, and the second one is from Pesach Sheni. And the curious thing is that the pasuk which we use when we say Koreich, when we eat Koreich, the pasuk which we recite is the pasuk Al Matzus Moror, which is the pasuk which is talking about Pesach Sheni. Why don't we use the pasuk from Pesach Rishon? So that was the question, which is a simple question, obvious question. Now, what he quotes from, I think, from one of the Belzer Rebbes is something to say that the first, we're sitting at the Seder. Unfortunately, we don't have the Beis Hamikdash, evidently, because we're sitting wherever we are, without a Korban Pesach. But we are hoping that by Pesach Sheni, we'll have a Pesach, we'll have the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, we invoke the pasuk from Pesach Sheni rather than the pasuk from Pesach Rishon. That was the pshat, which he quotes there from, I think it's one of the Belzer Rebbes. But actually, this question is addressed by the Rebbe in his commentary on the Haggadah. What you have in front of you is a quote from the Rebbe's Haggadah, but it's actually a developed edition. There's a couple of editions which have been taken the Rebbe's Haggadah and kind of reworded some of it to make it easier to understand. And so this is one of the editions published by Heichel Menachem in Shalayim. And so let's read the Rebbe's comment here. We have to understand, why are we quoting the pasuk of Pesach Sheni and not the pasuk v'ochros hambosar balayla hazeh sli'eshu matzis al merodim yechluhu? Why don't we at Koreich quote the pasuk which is written at Pesach Rishon? To which the answer is that it depends on, it's actually, you have to read those psukim carefully. I'm going to go to the second slide and see what the Rebbe explained here. The pasuk by Pesach Rishon says the following: you should eat the meat of the Korban Pesach at this night. It should be eaten roasted in fire. You should also eat matzos, and you should eat it with merorim, with bitter herbs. In this pasuk, it's not explicit that the meat is to be eaten with the matzos. You should eat basar, which is roasted. You should matzos. You should also eat matzos. Al merorim yecheluhu is ambiguous, and it could say that the meat should be eaten with the merorim, with the bitter herbs. It's not so evident that it means that the matzah should be eaten with the meat and the bitter herbs. We look now at the pasuk in Pesach Sheni, and it says about having the Korban Pesach on the 14th, etc. Al matzos u'merorim yochlu, that the Korban Pesach should be eaten with matzah and moror. So that makes it clearer that the Korban Pesach has to be eaten together with matzah and moror. And so that's why in choosing which pasuk to invoke, to quote at Koreich, the choice is to take the pasuk from Pesach Sheni, where it becomes very clear explains what we're doing now. Whereas the pasuk from Pesach Rishon, it was matzos, comma, al merorim yechluhu. Well, it doesn't say that you're meant to have the matzah and the moror together with the Korban Pesach. So that's the Rebbe's explanation. Actually, my recollection is the Rebbe does not quote this explanation from anyone else. It's the Rebbe's own explanation, although the majority of the Haggadah of the Rebbe is quotes from other Meforshim, but this, I think, is the Rebbe's own original explanation. Sure, the question is in many Haggadahs, but that's the expression I see. Okay, let's go on to a practical question, and that is a shliach somewhere in the United States writes to me that he has, Baruch Hashem, a growing minyan of Anash. He started off as a Chabad house, but I guess due to the price of property in Crown Heights, etc., people are looking elsewhere, and so he's got a growing minyan of Anash. What's beautiful about this is they have more than a minyan who actually come Shabbos Mevorchim morning for Tehilim. At the moment, however, they haven't galvanized to the point of having a chazan leading the Tehilim. So you've got 10 people plus sitting together and saying Tehilim, each one at their own pace. And sometimes someone will finish off a sefer, and then someone who wants to say Kaddish will say Kaddish. And it may even be rather random, even the Seder of someone who happens to finish a sefer, it's a sefer Revi or sefer Shlishi, and it's a little bit, so he's asking, what's the story? Can you have Kaddish said in such a setting when you've got 10 people in a room, each one saying Tehillim on their own? Is it justified to say those Kadeishim once, twice, and actually 5 times over? This is the question. So here, as you know, one of my favorite Sforim is the Piskei Teshuvos, and this is from Simon and Hay. So he addresses Limud saying Kaddish after learning or Tehillim. So he says, Min Hadin, even if a single person has learned something or said Tehillim, but he said it in the presence of 10 people. So if either he learned something in the presence of 10 people, or he said a mizmor, or even 3 psukim, in the presence of 10 people, then he is justified in saying Kaddish. The proof to this is in the footnotes is the idea of Peiros al Shma, and that is where it's justified. Even if let's say you have the way it's described in Shulchan Aruch Simon Samach Tes, you've got 9-10 people in a room, and each one is Davish one Esra, but none of them heard Kedusha. So one person will go to the Yomid, and he'll repeat the Shemon Esrei. He's down already. He's repeating the Shemon Esrei again, just in order to enable people to hear Kedusha. And even if only one person hasn't heard Kedusha, it's justified for him to repeat the whole Shemon Esrei in order to enable one person to hear Kedusha, to answer Kedusha. So if that's the case, it's also not surprising that even one person has learnt Berabim, Mishnah, or said several psukim Berabim, then Kaddish is justified min hadin. Now, before reading further, I want to say that I've said this before, but evidently it needs to be repeated. Often people are saying Mishnayos, Rabbi Shmuel or other Mishnayos, and they say that in a way that the people don't hear them, and all of a sudden they're saying Kaddish. Perhaps in a B'derech I would call that Kaddish Rabbanon and a Kaddish Yosem. The Kaddish Rabbanon has to be after Limud, and we know that the Rebbe, for example, by Rabbi Shmuel, he would say it aloud, audibly at least, in the tune of Limud. And the main thing is that people could hear the Mishnah being said, or the Brais in that case, and then the Kaddish is justified. But by learning quietly, you wouldn't be able to say Kaddish. And coming back to this story in this community in, as I said, somewhere in the United States, if they're just saying Tehillim on their own quietly and not once saying aloud, even 3 psukim, then that wouldn't be okay to say Kaddish. But okay. But if one does it, if he would say several psukim aloud, then he would be justified to say Kaddish. The Piskei Teshuvos then continues and says that Yesh HaKoisrim are those who write that Lamaisa, one should reprimand those who do so, and even an oval during the year, or a recite, should not just say a Mishnah and do a Kaddish. It needs to be that there should be a Rov minyan who have actually joined in the learning. Now this quote is from the Munkach Rov, the Minchas Elazar, and elsewhere the Rebbe, we know, has said, in the Munkach, the Rebbe appreciates very much the Munkach's analysis of Halocho and Piskei Dinim, but I believe in this particular instance, it's clearly we don't follow that caution, and we see that the minig in Chabad is that a person who's in Shnas Avelis or a Yortzeit does say a Mishnah alone, and everyone hears the Mishnah and says Kaddish. So, strictly speaking, we can go back to the first opinion that one person saying a Mishnah aloud in the presence of 10 people would justify saying Kaddish. And so the same thing could be theoretically with Tehilim. However, I want to share with you a sicha of one of many, but here's a sicha as you see from Tafshin Chaf Aleph, and the Rebbe emphasizes that the Tehilim was instituted b'tzibur dafka. Ad, and read those words, the second line. Ad, it was emphasized that after Tehilim should say Kaddish. So the Rebbe is saying to prove the point that the Tehilim was instituted by the Frierdiker Rebbe to be said b'tzibur. The fact that he instituted to say Kaddish emphasizes it has to be b'tzibur. So that's clearly the position is that it should be done b'tzibur wherever possible. And the Rebbe continues, not like those Spitz Chabad. Now, I don't have an English translation for Spitz Chabad. It's not a compliment. It's similar to the American word smart aleck. Not like the Spitz Chabad who believe that they don't have to come to join everyone for Tehilim because he's going to be learning Chassidus, he's going to be Miyachad Yechudim, or he doesn't know what he's doing, and he says Tehilim on his own because he is an exalted personality. That wasn't the takana. The idea is to say Tehilim b'tzibur together with other Yidden. So my response to this shliach is that you've got Baruch Hashem, you've got a minyan there, get someone to go to the Yomid and lead the tzibur. And of course you have people, some can say Tehilim faster, some slower. So there may not be a perfect solution to go through the whole Tehilim with that should be the goal. There should be a chazan, and then after the chazan has finished a sefer, and it says he ought to just say it aloud. The one who asked me, the shliach who asked me, a very edel geman, he says that he himself he struggles to finish off the Tehilim in the space of an hour, etc. So would it be okay for him to say part of the Tehilim earlier? And then he will say, in other words, he'll say Sforim Shlishi, Revi, Chamishi, he'll say early in the morning, and then he'll say, with the tzibur, he'll say Sefer Aleph or Beis or something, because that's how he feels he can manage. So his question is basically, how essential is it to say the Tehilim in the sequence as they are published in the Tehilim? So I answered him, I heard that one of the Levertov brothers, forgotten his first name, one of them lived in Crown Heights, but he was a shamus in a shul in East Flatbush, which meant spending quite a bit of the Shabbos walking there, walking back, and then in the winter Shabbos come to the Rebbe's Farbrengen, and he was struggling to find time on the Shabbos to finish the whole of Tehilim. And the Rebbe advised him that whilst he's walking there and back, there are many parts of Tehilim which he would know by heart because they're parts of davening. So the Rebbe told him that whilst he's walking there and back, he should say those Tehilim which he remembers by heart. And then when he gets to either to the shul or back to 770, whatever, when he is in a Beis HaMedrash or at home, he would then use the Tehilim, the Sefer, to fill in the parts of Tehilim which he doesn't know Baal Peh. So the Rebbe had, at least V'shas at Chak, condoned that it's okay to say the Tehilim Shaloi ala Seder. Whilst I'm at this point, I want to just share with you that last week we had a discussion about saying the Rebbe's Tehilim, even though it's past Gimel Tammuz, and I shared a sicha of the Frierdiker Rebbe, of the Rebbe. I shared a sicha of the Rebbe, of the Frierdiker Rebbe with the Rebbe Rashab, how the Frierdiker Rebbe has a vision of his father, the Rebbe Rashab, saying a mimer on Kapitel Pei Dalet, and this was in 1944 or something, or 1943 in the United States. So the Rebbe brings from that a basis that you continue saying the Tehilim. So Rebbe David Baram, who's one of our regular listeners, so he writes to, he told me on the phone actually, he was once in Yechidus. He was saying many times Yechidus. Once he was Yechidus, and the Rebbe tells him, for sure you say the Kapitel Tehilim of the Atabetach Omer Tehilim Shel Mori V'Chami. So he didn't know what to answer. But then he, afterwards, he went into the Maskiris and he asked them which is the capital of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and they were a little bit lost. They had to work it out. But the Rebbe was by him the Rebbe Dover HaPoshut of saying the Frierdiker Rebbe's Tehilim. I'll leave that with you if you want to ask him Mashpia whether you should or you shouldn't. That's your business. Okay. Now, then this came up about using a double oven. Someone asking advice about using a double oven. So this is discussed in contemporaries forum. The issue here is, does the steam go from one to the other? And does the taste, in other words, the question is, you've got two ovens which are in one piece of equipment. Is there a problem of having one fleshik and one milchik? So there's a Sefer Psachim at Shuvas, which is the Yeridea version of the Piskei Shuvas. He talks about this. He gives a reference to this Sefer which you have in front of you, which is Psachim of the late Rav Vosner. So I'm going to read from this the original. An oven which has got two compartments, it's preferable to avoid using both compartments simultaneously, one for milchik and one for fleshik. Now, this is possibly because of the vent, where you've got a shared vent, and you'd have then the likelihood of the milchik vapor mixing in with the fleshik vapor, perhaps even going back into the other chamber. That's possibly what they're concerned about. So not to use the two ovens at the same time for milchik and fleshik. Then he says some would be mahader to wait 24 hours between one and the other. But to have two compartments, one fleshik and one parva, or one milchik, one parva, that's okay. He then goes into another issue. He says that if you have the ovens which are made with a hechsher, which unfortunately I don't think are very much available in this part of the world, unless there's a special order. So he says the ovens which are made with a hechsher, there's an absolute separation between the two compartments, and therefore it is okay to use one for fleshik and one for milchik. But okay, let's come back to the regular ovens which are available in the market here. So in the Psachim at Shuvas, he talks about a difference whether the two ovens, the two chambers, are riveted, screwed to one another, or if they are welded to one another. In the case that they're welded to one another, he's more concerned of the spread of taste, because we have the idea of cham miksosei cham kuloi, and as if in the metal or the wall of the oven there would be a spread of the taste via the metal to the other part. As perhaps a bit stretched as it may be, but on the other hand, where do you draw the line? And so if they are riveted, so they are separate pieces, we wouldn't say there would be taste going from one to the other. When they're welded together, he is concerned of the taste kind of being shared from one to the other. As I was reading this, I was thinking, what about double sinks? Many of us have a double sink. And sometimes people move into a house where there's already a double sink. Is it okay to have one of the double sinks for fleshik and one for milchik? Now, there's one issue about splashing from one sink to the other. That can be resolved by either having a little wall, a partition wall between the two, or by having, let's say, like a board, which is like acts as a lid. And whilst you're using the fleshik sink, the milchik sink is covered by that board, and then you'd turn it over or have another board. When you're using the milchik sink, you'd cover the fleshik sink. So the splashing is one issue. But what about the issue of cham miksosei cham kuloi? Is there not a concern that there's going to be a spread of taste from the fleshik sink to the milchik sink? And the answer is, there's much less of a concern over here in the case of the sinks, because in the case of the sink, the heat is coming, if there is hot water coming, it's coming from the tap. The the bowl is cold in itself, and therefore the intensity of the heat is much less, and therefore there's much more elbow room to say that the taste from one sink is not going to spread to the other. Generally, I feel that when people fill up sinks for washing dishes, they put in soap usually, which again, soap would neutralize. It would be poigim any taste. Therefore, again, I'm really not so concerned about the double sinks. Not to be confused with, therefore, with our case, with the two ovens, where we're talking about an intense heat, and there's the two tastes of the fleshig and the milchig, and there is more of a concern if it is indeed one piece of metal, that the taste would be kind of spreading from one to the other. Let's move on to the next point, and that is that one of our shluchim, Baruch Hashem, his activities are expanding, and he needs more space. Next door, there is actually a Methodist church, which is, Baruch Hashem, defunct. It's not been functioning for the last couple of years. They are not ready to sell. Not yet. It's obviously, I can understand their community would be pained to see how their place of worship is sold away, sold out, sold to another party. So at the moment, they're not ready to sell. He would like to buy it if it were available, and the taking a place of worship, a Christian place of worship, and making it into a shul, it has its limitations, but it's a very common thing, and unfortunately, it sometimes works the other way too. But that's, meanwhile, though, he's asking, can I rent a room there? It's actually used for, it was used. In the day, it was used for worship. It was also used for social activities. So this is his question. Can I rent a room in that disused church? So what I have in front of you is a tshuva from the Chelkas Yaakov, who was a Rov in Zurich, in Switzerland, and he's mentioning a story back in 1932 where there was a question in Germany where for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the local synagogue needed to have an extra hall to accommodate all the extra people who would be coming for Yom Neroim, and the only hall which was available was a hall for the Catholic youth, which is affiliated, which is connected to their church. And his conclusion is that it's not okay because it's part of the place of worship. It's not okay if it were, because it's on rental. If it were a purchase, it's a different story. But so long as it's still part of the church, then it would not be acceptable to use it for hire. Okay, let's move on. So here I got a question from someone in Eastern Europe. He asks a question: may one invest in funds, securities of companies that produce weapons? So this is a very timely question. So I asked him, who do you want to, who's the weapons for? Is it for which side? For friends or foes? So he says, no, it's actually for friends. Is it okay to invest in companies which produce weapons? So in Shulchan Aruch, it's a Bryson of a Zorah, and it's in Rambam, and here it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, where it says that one's not allowed to sell to a non-Jew or to a Jew who's suspect of mischief, not allowed to sell them bears, lions, weapons, stocks. Don't mean stocks and shares. We mean the old-fashioned ones, which and many an English village green is graced with. So you wouldn't be allowed to sell those to people who use them for mischief, using or other metal things which could be used for, and nor should one sharpen weapons for them, neither to build premises which would be used for punishment, for corporal capital punishment. The Gemara then says, the Shulchan Aruch says, if Yidden are dwelling amongst Goyim, and they have with them a pact that they will provide weapons for the military, and the military will protect the Yidden, so then it's legitimate to sell weapons to that military who is committed to protect you. So that's the Gemara says about the fact about the Persians, that the Yidden were permitted to manufacture and sell weapons to the Persians, because the Persians did commit themselves to protect the Jewish population. So to a government which is a government which is protecting Yidden, then one would be allowed to sell them weapons, and as a result, it's not a problem to, by extension, to invest in their funds to help them operate. I was still concerned, though, mentioned the questioner asked America. Well, America, we know that a lot of the weapons which go there go to private people, not necessarily to governments, and a lot of mischief does happen with them. So therefore, I was a little bit hesitant. But here we have the Shach on the bottom. It's on the bottom of our slide. On this piece of Shulchan Aruch, the Shach writes that nowadays it is customary to sell weapons to Ovdei Kechovim, because through them we are saved from enemies which come to our city. So the Shach seems to take it a little bit further, not only when there is a pact with a government, even for individuals, but since it is the expectation that they will protect from enemies attacking the community, therefore it would be legitimate to sell weapons. And I know that this part of the concern was some of those weapons will land in private hands, but we do have the Shach says it's permitted. Okay, so here we come on to our next question, that a little baby was born by Hashem to a beautiful, a young couple who had been waiting for several years, and I don't know whether they themselves bought the toy or someone bought them, but here the mummy had hung up these toys in the crib, in the cot, and the father, who's a Talmud Chochem, comes home. Wait a minute, says, that's a picture of the sun. We have a problem of having an image of the sun. The other one is meant to be the moon. I wasn't so impressed that the moon looks very much like a moon, but the sun is well, that's what we recognize as the sun, or this yellow ball. I know it doesn't have the horns the way it looks like, but okay. So here's the question: are you allowed to have a picture of the sun, or an image of the sun? And that was the question. So here we have in Shulchan Aruch. This is in Siman Kuf Mem Aleph in Yeridea, where the Shulchan Aruch says that one is not allowed to. And actually, by the way, if you've been following Rambam in Gimel Prokim, this has come up in today's Rambam twice, about the issue of making images of heavenly bodies. So we have here the halacha of we're not allowed to make images, surais of images in the heavenly, of the malachim, of the angels. And then I talked about the image of a person, which we discussed several times in the recent shiurim. And then we have the second part. Then it says, "B'med dvorim amurim," when we say you're not allowed to have a human image, that's only if it is boiletes, if it's a sculpture, if it's embossed, ava b'shekas, but if it's flat, as it would be woven into a garment, a tapestry, or painted onto a flat surface, So then a human image on a flat surface is permitted, and that's why why we do allow having photographs, etc. But then the Shulchan Aruch says, but a picture of the sun, the moon, and the stars, also that's forbidden, whether it is embossed, whether it's in relief, or if it's flat. Unless it's there for instruction. So we know the story of Gamliel had in his attic, he had drawings of the moon, the different positions of the moon, and when witnesses would come to testify they saw the rebirth of the moon, he would interrogate them. Did you see like this? Did you see like that? So that was for teaching. So for instruction, that's okay. But just for mere entertainment, etc., we're not allowed to make an image of the sun or the moon, even if it's flat. So back to that toy, which is depicting the sun. So I said, actually, yes, it is a problem, and you should give it back. They had also some other toys which had pictures of stars with 5 spikes, etc. I wasn't convinced that those look anything like the stars which we see in heaven. But the sun, a round yellow ball, is the way we see the sun, and that it does raise a question. Okay, I see there's a couple of questions. Right, someone's pointing out the numbers have changed. Yes, I'll get to. I've added a question in my list, and I'll get to that question, which is by you is number 7. By me, that's number 8. For some reason, a last-minute change of seats. Right, someone points out the seal of Chizkiyahu or Hamelech contained a sun. This is a good one. You can't have an image of planets as a desktop background. That's interesting. That's an interesting question, because it's not it's not an image, because it's just pixels which are. That's an interesting question. Okay, right. There's also I was expecting someone to say the Gan Yisrael emblem was of 2 boys sitting on a boat on a lake, and there's a sun in the background. We've gone through this before, but I don't have a simple answer. We do have a halachic in Shulchan Aruch, and so that's what we follow. Fine. Let's move on to the next question, and that was the child has a blister and is in pain, and are you allowed to pierce the blister in order to release the pus? Now, don't ask me about Hilchos first aid. Like, ask a first aid. I'm just reading the Halocho, and anyone who's learned Gemara Shabbos, this comes up right near the beginning. I think it's Daf Gimel of Shabbos, about piercing a mapis mursa, piercing a blister, and if it's made, if this is by the way is on from Shin Chof Ches. That's that large siman which talks all about medical conditions in relation to Shabbos. So towards the end of the siman, Sif Lamed Beis, it tells us that if one is making a neat opening so that you want to have a space for air to come in to allow the blister to heal on the inside, then that would be punishable under Makeh B'Patish. It's like you're making a finishing touch, it's a tikkun, etc. But what's more relevant to us is the second paragraph. Ve'im heifiso kadei lohoitzi meimenu halecho hamitzah bilvad. If the purpose of piercing the blister is not to allow air to come in, but merely to allow to extract the pus, which the presence of the pus is causing pain, then you are allowed to do so. So it's one of those things which it says it's potur umuter. It's permitted to do so, even though inevitably there is going to be an opening for air to come in, but that's not your motive here, and therefore that is okay. So to pierce the blister, to have just to release the pus would be okay. Careful. The next piece after this talks about if it's going to cause bleeding. Causing bleeding is forbidden on Shabbos. We're talking here just about pus. To just release pus is okay if you assess that it's going to allow bleeding to as a result, then one shouldn't be doing it on Shabbos. Let's now see what some people have pointed over here. Can an artist paint a picture with a sun or moon in the scenery? So the general answer is not to do a full sun, to have part of it in the picture and part of it not in the picture. As someone is pointing out that most doctors advise not to pierce it, as it allows infection to enter. As I said, I'm not dealing with the first aid advice. I'm just the question, the halacha question, whether it's allowed, and the halacha is allowed. You're saying that sort of area that it's not advised. I accept that, not a problem. Let's move on. Okay, so this question I got also after I had sent out the list of questions. So Shliach in Eretz Yisrael, he lives in the Moshav, and he makes the minyan. And it turns out the majority of the minyan are Kaddish sayers. Is it okay? But we know for Kaddish you have to have 6 people who will answer Kaddish. What happens if there's 10 people and 7 or 8 are saying Kaddish? So there's only 2 people who are answering. Is that acceptable or not? So this question is not a new question. It has been raised by the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai has a Shabbos Mevorchim volume called Rov of Anash. And later, it looks like later in his life, he put together what's known as the Ben Ish Chai, which is similar to a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So in the Ben Ish Chai, this is the end of Parshas Vayechi, Shana Rishona. He has 2 annual series. So he writes the following. He's quoting from his Sefer Rov of Anash, where he was asked the question, if 10 people had said Tehilim together, and they all want to say Kaddish, there's no one to answer. And he says, make sure at least one person should remain to be able to answer the Kaddish. There should be at least one. And the Ben Ish Chai says, if that's the case, you should have 2, because you say Imru Omen. Imru is the plural. You should have at least 2 people available to answer Kaddish. Now, what about when it says you have to have 6 people to be able to hear the Kaddish? That means that there should be 6 people who are focusing on what's going on, rather than just doing other business. But people who are saying Kaddish are part of the Kaddish, so to speak, of the saying of the Kaddish. So they combine, which similarly, perhaps we've done this before. There's a business of saying Kedusha, starting Shmoneser together with the Chazan, and saying Kedusha together with the Chazan. So actually, that person counts for the Tisha Oinim. He counts as part of the minimum of 9 listeners. Even though he's actually saying, that's fine. He's not doing something else. He's part of the picture. So that's what's okay. And same thing over here. What I found actually interesting in the previous piece, the earlier piece in the Ben Ish Chai, talks about saying Kaddish, and one person saying Kaddish loud and others saying quietly. And I think we did discuss this, that some poskim are upset about this. They say, no, Kaddish has to be said aloud. So when several people are saying Kaddish, all of them should be saying it in an audible way. But actually, the Ben Ish Chai does condone where you have a Choshev who knows Kabbalah, etc., and he's saying Kaddish with deep kavanas, and other people want to also say Kaddish, but they don't have the level of knowledge, etc. And he says it's okay for the others to say Kaddish quietly, along with this Choshev this Talmud Chacham who's saying Kaddish aloud. Having said that, it comes to mind right as I'm speaking that what we saw by the Rebbe was different. And when the Rebbe had recite and said Kaddish, so it was the Seder was that at each point the Rebbe would say Kaddish on his own, and when the Rebbe finished saying Kaddish, then everyone else said all the other chiyuvim said those Kadeishim. So perhaps we are a little bit not happy that they should all be saying Kaddish quietly, rather that they should be saying Kaddish aloud, albeit with a little bit of a delay. someone is pointing out that a moon is an issue if not allowed in any form, as that's how it appears. Indeed, yes. The poskim say it doesn't matter whether the moon is in a crescent or in a full circle, if that's the way we see it, yes. And the reason why two-dimensional pictures of the sun are not allowed, whereas a two-dimensional picture of a person is allowed, is because we normally see in 3D, and therefore it's not a realistic picture. Whereas the sun and the moon, because they're so distant, we see them as 2D, and therefore, even as we had the Lashon Shekas, even if it's a flat picture, one wouldn't be allowed. Right. Someone's asking, does it need to be two people over bar mitzvah to answer? I think not. Actually, that's a very good point. If the whole point is v'imru amen, so then it can be under bar mitzvah also. The proof to this is that some poskim say in various contexts, when you say v'imru amen, what we say in benching, v'imru amen, and who is saying v'imru amen? So they say to malachim. Well, malachim are also not bar mitzvah. So if they can be the ones who are answering the Imru Amen, so it would also be for children, I think that would be fine. Or for that matter, it could be Noshim also. It doesn't have to be Dafka men. Right. Yes, thank you. And some shuls, they have the meaning that only one person said Kaddish, but most shuls today do allow several people to say Kaddish together, and that's what we were dealing with. Finally, yes, so some time back, we had a whole discussion. A particular shliach asked me the question. He gives a shiur, GLI, whatever it may be, and there's these fine neshamas who are sitting there, neshamas begufim, but the likelihood is they did not say birchas Torah. And we did raise the question that to learn Torah without birchas Torah is an issue. And now, if you remember, the discussion was that there's a difference between just thinking Torah, which is allowed without birchas Torah. I know the Koreich is machmir, but the Alter Rebbe allows hirur without birchas Torah. But listening, shomea koine, so listening to a shiur, a live shiur, is before birchas Torah is a problem. So that raises the problem with giving shiurim to people who haven't said the birchas Torah. So my son-in-law in Chicago, he brought to my attention that this is addressed in the Sefer Minchas Osher, one of the eminent Rabbanim today. Poskim is of Osher Weiss, a prolific author, and he writes about this. He's got a commentary, I guess it's Halochos, but according to the Parashas HaTorah, on the Hazinu, where that's where the mitzvah of birchas Torah comes up. Kishem Hashem Ekra Hova Goydel Leilakenu. So in that area, Parshas Hazinu, he addresses this question of teaching divrei Torah for people who know definitely that they haven't said birchas Torah, and so you're causing limud Torah. It's like feeding food to someone who hasn't said a bracha, which is the issue of lifnei iver. And he says this is typical Israeli stuff. It's very, very common when you're taking a taxi, and the taxi driver is very happy to hear a Dvar Torah, although it's unlikely that he's said birchas Torah. So he says the following, a very convincing argument. He says the bracha is obviously less important than the thing itself. Let's say the lulav and the bracha on the lulav. So the lulav is the more important. The bracha is important, but it's toffel to the lulav. Now, if you had a scenario where you could bench lulav, but you couldn't make a bracha, of course you'd say bracha sein ma'akvis. And so he says a similar thing. If here you have a choice to teach Torah without a bracha or to not teach Torah, so the obvious logic is teach Torah, even though it's missing. It's important. It's an area which is missing that they didn't say birchas Torah, but that should not be an obstacle. That should not be a reason not to teach because the person hasn't said birchas Torah, and therefore that's his weighing up that you should teach, and you can also teach them they should say birchas Torah. But yeah, that's completed our list for today. There was something else about Yizker which I took out of the list because I didn't find adequate sources for that. let's just see our last comment on the chat. Is that as a person can listen to Kriyas HaTorah without Birchas HaTorah, and use as a person called up to the Torah and use the Aliyah Brachos for the Torah, that would imply hearing is okay. Okay, fair enough. All right, so I'll finish with that. I wish you all a good Shabbos and a good Chodesh, and we should meet in good health. Tomit Kol Hayomim.